I am very, very happy and pleased to be with Raja together, talking about his new book, Going Home, a walk through 50 years of occupation. When I asked Raja how he would like me to introduce him, he said very, very briefly. So I will do a formal kind of introduction, and I will read what really is written on most of his books. And then I will have my own personal introduction, because my friendship with Raja goes back a long way, and I'm not satisfied only with a formal introduction. So Raja Shahade is Palestine's leading writer. He is also a lawyer and the founder of the pioneering Palestinian human rights organization, Al-Haq. I'm sure most of you know more about the names and events that I'm going to talk about. Shahade is the author of several acclaimed books published by Profile, including the Orwell Prize-winning Palestinian Walks, as well as Strangers in the House, Occupation Diaries, Language of War, Language of Peace, A Rift in Time, and Where the Line is Drawn. He lives in Ramallah, Palestine, obviously. He's in Birzeit now, and he's a close neighbor. And all of you probably have read many of his books and have met him, known him personally. I'm sorry if we're sitting, I'm just trying to avoid the sun. But my own personal introduction to Raja goes back many years ago. We were born 10 years apart, and I knew him as a child when he used to come to the Friends Girls' School with his sisters, Samar and Siham, and I was a teenager. And I remember Raja, we'll all look at this little boy who comes with his sisters, and all I remember are really the black, intelligent, brilliant eyes. I grew up in Ramallah and got to know Raja slowly, but most of all, I knew his family. His family was from Jaffa and lived in Ramallah. And like my own parents, who originally came from Jaffa and lived in Ramallah, and they used to be friends, they would socialize once in a while. And I always heard from my parents, and later on when I read more of Raja's books, how close these families were to their background in Jaffa, to the cultural life, and to what really connected them with the sea and with that part of the world that later on they had to be really severed from. And this brought my friendship later on with Raja to a very warm and very intimate understanding of his writings. Whenever I would read his memoirs or most of his books, because I felt they were really part of his life, part of his anguish, part of his way of dealing with things, and I would be inspired. And I would say, one might try thinking about things like this. Sometimes I would agree with him. Sometimes his books will make me cry. Sometimes, but I always connected. And so it's really wonderful that I'm with you, Raja, here, talking about your last book, or your latest book, not your last book. And we'd like to hear more of what you want to say about the book. But one thing I want to say is, slowly as I started learning, we were in Amman living, and Raja was a student at Birzeit University in his teenage years, and then later as a young man growing up, later getting his education in law. And I would hear about people saying, did you hear what Raja Shahade wrote? He wrote this and this article. He said this and this. And so to me, I've always been working or walking with Raja. So Raja, tell us more about your book.
Well, I first want to thank the Palestine Museum for this invitation, for organizing this wonderful event. This book was launched in Edinburgh International Book Festival in August. And that was an important event, of course, for me, but it is especially nice event to have it launched in Ramallah, which the book is really about, and also to have amongst the audience many friends, including 2 of my classmates from school with whom we grew together from the beginning, first grade, to the end, to the last grade, so 12 years. The book is, can you all hear? It's okay? Yeah. The book is a simple, I did Palestinian walks, which is about walks taken over a period of 27 years. This book is a book about a walk taken in one day. And it is a book about going home in the literary sense. I start from home, walk to the office, have a short meeting, and walk back home. And that is all the book is about, one day only. I will read from various parts of the book, and then we will have a discussion, Tanya and myself. And for those who might have the book with them, I will always indicate where I'm reading from. So the first part that I want to read is from the first chapter, and it's page 3. Every morning, when I look in the mirror, a serious face stares back. I try to remember that the face I have imprinted on my mind is not the face others see. I know I have another side to me, but who else would know it from looking at me? Where and when did these markers of age appear? How much manipulation and control do we have over how we look? Does our face always betray us? Is the relaxed face of a child that time of life when we seem to live most in the present, the real face of who we are? Perhaps there is little I can do to conceal anything. They say we get the face we deserve. But is that really true? It strikes me now that each memoir I've written is but another interpretation of my life. So maybe the way my face has matured is just another sort of memoir, one that is imprinted and that I'm not in control of. Maybe this one is the most honest. These days, thoughts of my father are with me more often. For a long time, as I was growing up, he was a mystery that I wanted to explore. The ailments of his aging body and his mood swings were never discussed, perhaps because he was too proud or too anxious about growing old. So I did not know how he dealt with them. His sacrosanct law office was another mystery. I almost held my breath when I visited. His politics, his relationship with my mother, his death, all remain mysterious and unresolved in my mind. But perhaps most mysterious of all was his life in Jaffa, which I wanted to emulate but couldn't, much as I tried when I lived in Beirut and London. Jaffa, the metropolis, remains the place of my imaginings, where he lived his fantasy life by the sea, in a prosperous and vibrant city. It will always have that special resonance for me, but it's here in Ramallah where I find my parents, myself, and my life scattered around in the various houses in which I've lived and written my books. I will next read a section from the chapter 5, and it's on page 65. For the past week, every time I've walked to the office, I've noticed an old man with a long necktie sitting near the curb at the same corner of the pavement, looking wistfully as if bidding farewell to the scene before his eyes. And he was there again today, in the same place and with the same pose. He was frail, with quick, sudden movements, which were then followed by moments of long repose. Who was he? A man who was dying, or an expat who was visiting after a long absence, and possibly for the last time? He wore a red and black waistcoat and always started the day by sitting near the curb, his nose almost touching his long, narrow chin, his mouth firmly closed, his eyes looking dreamily into the distance. Both his hands rested on the crook of his smooth, amber-colored wooden cane. Something about him intrigued me. Sitting as he did, bent over, reflecting on his life as he scrutinized every passerby. I found myself observing him with fascination, worried that one day I might end up like him, posing at street corners in Ramallah, directing my gaze to the horizon in a long, vacant stare. Looking at him made me wonder what it takes to remain human in a place so buffeted by aggression, dominated by the struggle for survival. How is it possible to avoid resorting to anger and utter hatred, and at the same time guard against becoming insular and insensitive? There is no telling how much longer the occupation will last. Both of my parents' lives ended before they saw a resolution of the struggle. And mine may as well. I've always had to conserve my energies and prepare for survival under these harsh and distressing conditions for an indeterminate length of time. But I know from my experience in the first Intifada that days lost cannot be compensated for. I am no longer young. I don't feel I have limitless time during which I will remain physically well. I don't want to end up feeling embittered, standing on a street corner like that old man with a sense that my life has been lost, dissipated. I will now read from chapter 10, page 108. Now, excuse me, maybe I should. Now, on the 50th anniversary of the occupation, I am again walking up Irsal Street to the Muqata'a and thinking how this occupation has accompanied me most of my life. It has walked with me like a shadow, stalking me, sometimes posing to a challenge, but more often a threat. At times, I have tried doggedly to shake it off, live as though it were not there, but it always proved stronger and reasserted its presence. And so, I've come to accept that it is my karma to live under it. When I was young, I rebelled against my fate and tried to escape its clutches, but it proved too tenacious. Even when I traveled, it came along and refused to leave me alone. And now, as I stroll through the Ramallah streets, I come across so many reminders that bring everything back. There were times when we hoped that we were getting rid of the occupation, and I worked and lived for that moment. But it dissipated 24 years ago with the first Oslo Accord. And since then, I've lived without hope, constantly trying to adjust to life and accept that it will only go from bad to worse as the occupation becomes more entrenched, grabbing more of our land and tightening the noose around our necks. The lines from Auden's poem Spain about the Spanish Civil War come to mind. We are left alone with our day, and the time is short, and history to the defeated may say, alas. but cannot help or pardon. I will read from chapter 11, page 185. I have now walked to the end of Irsal. At one corner, the road going east leads to the boulevard that dignitaries visiting the Palestinian Authority drive along after crossing the Israeli checkpoint called DCO in reference to the District Coordination Office there. Another of the Ramallah exits which is blocked. The government spent a lot of money to make the road leading into the city from that checkpoint as impressive as possible, following the practice of most impoverished countries in making every effort to keep out of sight any evidence of poverty from the main artery leading from the airport to the posh hotels where they stay. After Oslo, we had high hopes that Palestine would have an airport of its own. The DCO is all we got. When dignitaries come to visit our president in Ramallah, Palestinian soldiers can be seen with their armored cars parked at the corner leading to the checkpoint, unable to venture any further, as though they are waiting at a proper border for their state, when all it is a border that isn't a border. The DCO separates Palestinian territory from other Palestinian territory within the West Bank. When the dignitaries arrive, these soldiers accompany them in an impressive parade, while other foot soldiers line the streets of Ramallah all the way to their hotel. To my left, as I face the road leading downhill to Birzeit, north of Ramallah, is a grand building in the shape of a ship, hence its name, As-Safine. It is narrow in front and tilted up like a bow, with round windows on the side and a chimney on the top flying the national flag. In this ship, there is a Caribbean restaurant flying the Jolly Roger with its skull and crossbones. The front is directed towards the horizon and the Mediterranean Sea as though ready to sail. This strange structure confirms my impression of Ramallah as a city of illusions, inhabited by aspirants, poised to take off, but prevented by the forces of circumstance and misfortune. At the ship, I turn back. When I reach the crossroads near the new Muqata'a, I turn right and walk down Ain Musbah Street, which circles the center of the city, passing by the old spring from which the people in this part of Ramallah used to fetch water before there was running water. When I pass Dar Sa in the old city, I remember the exhibition entitled Pattern Recognition that I had visited there last year. The new Ramallah has an impressive output of culture and art, which had been rare in the old Ramallah I grew up in. One video stood out. It was called Yam, Hebrew for sea, and was by Ruba Salami, who was born in Nazareth in 1985. It showed people waiting for a minibus with traffic passing by against a poster of the Gaza Sea, animated with an insertion of film fragments shot from the beach at Tantura in Israel. It was accompanied by the following text. Shown in Ramallah, the work ties together the fragmentary nature of Palestinian geography, Gaza, the West Bank, Jerusalem, and the territory of 1948. For many Palestinians, traveling the route of this very map has become an impossibility, unquote. As twilight descends, filled with hope and misgivings, I now walk home with hurried steps. And the last thing I want to read is the last chapter, chapter 12. The streets are clogged with traffic as people rush back home before the evening call to prayer that indicates the end of the day's fast. Some are just cruising around exhibiting their new cars bought with loans from the bank, playing loud music. Such a cacophony. There is too much light to be able to see the stars. I try to remember how it used to be when I walked home with my grandmother from the Grand Hotel. Then there were few streetlights, many broken by bored children throwing stones, competing over who had the better aim. The stars would be visible, and there would be almost total silence, with only the occasional car passing. As we walked home together, I could hear our footsteps and the click, click, click of Tata's wooden cane on the paving stones. Muffle up, we don't want your tummy to get cold, she would say as we struggled against the wind from the distant Mediterranean Sea that always hit us as soon as we turned the corner from the main street to Ahliya Street. I walk faster, trying to make it home before dark, thinking how the city I grew up in remained with me. I am able to see both the old and the new, how it was and how it has become. When I was younger, I was unable to see myself the way people saw me. I looked at the older people around me and felt dismayed at how they had aged. Now that I have neither youth nor age, I feel more tolerant and loving. I only hope that the time will come for me as it did for poet Derek Walcott, when with elation you will greet yourself arriving at your own door in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome. I used to believe that as I walked among the people of my city, I was mysterious, an enigma. I wondered what they made of me, of my often shabby dress and manifestation of rebellion. I don't anymore. I think they always knew me, perhaps better than I knew myself. They read me like an open book. My family is known, my heritage, lineage, my history, my capabilities and failures, though perhaps not so much through what has meant the most to me, my writing. For the others, I was only the lawyer. For many years, Al-Haq, which has become a well-respected public institution, was associated with my name. But that was mainly for an earlier generation. And yet, even though I have lived all my life in the same small city, I have never felt at ease with the society or truly a part of it. I was always at odds with the tradition, a rebel even when I yearned to belong. I always was and will remain an outsider. This may be why I've continued to be troubled by a recurrent dream of searching for a home. This feeling of being a stranger was shared by my maternal grandfather, Boulos Shahade, the poet, who towards the end of his short life, published a poem called Despair, in which he wrote, "The time of departure is nigh. Who will have tears to shed for me? I am but a stranger in these lands who has outstayed his time. As I approach my house, the shadow following me lengthens as the sun begins to set on my city. As I moved closer to home, my own shadow diminishes, so that by the time I arrive, it has disappeared altogether. I'm struck by the thought that when I'm gone, not even my shadow will remain. Before opening the gate, I look at my house with the soft, rosy light of the setting sun striking the limestone walls. The feathery leaves of the jacaranda in the garden hug the walls and shed their shadow over the entrance I'm now approaching. Our house is rather grand, I think, and turned inward. I have never looked at it this way before. Now I can see how like me it is. This is how I survived in my society, with its inflexibility and constant failures and retreats, by being like the house, walled, stubborn, centered, inward-looking, impregnable. With a mind of my own and my own peculiar ways, I wanted to escape my predicament, find consolation in abstraction, and turn suffering into art. Near the curb, a short distance from the entrance, I noticed the caper plant that I had looked at on my way out this morning. I see that its pods have opened. This bushy plant is growing out of bare rock, yet it flourishes, even without water. Its round, alternate leaves, thick, hardy, and shiny, are mauve in color, and among them the most beautiful flowers are blooming, composed of delicate pink-white petals and long violet stamens. Such a refreshing sight in these dry hills. No gardener has cultivated this bush, and perhaps, except for the spikes with which the plant protected itself, it might have been pulled up and destroyed, needing little organic matter to grow and be able to withstand high temperature. This delicate but hardy shrub has established itself in these hills. It is capable of surviving in tough conditions, producing luscious fruit in many different places around the world. I would like to think of myself in these terms. I am about to open the gate and enter the courtyard that leads to our main door, but I briefly glance back at the hills that can be seen beyond the empty plot between the buildings across the street. They look almost pink as the limestone reflects the setting sun. I want to linger and hold on to this day, another good day in the short time that is left to me. I linger a bit longer outside the gate until the sun has gone and the moon is visible. I may have missed out on many pleasures because of my physical vulnerability, but I have other satisfactions. A fragment of Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey comes to me. Wild ecstasies shall be matured into a sober pleasure when thy mind shall be a mansion for all lovely forms, thy memory be as a dwelling place for all sweet sounds and harmonies. The gate clicks shut behind me. I recall doing the same before the 2002 Israeli invasion of Ramallah. Then I was coming back home with supplies from the market. Once inside my house, I fantasized that I would be safe, that it could not happen to me. I had been going on with my life, trying to remain out of sight, keeping to myself, staring as few ripples as possible, convinced that the soldiers wouldn't enter my house. Faced with external danger, isn't this what most people tell themselves? Not me, it's the others. Don't see me, don't come to me, leave me alone, I'm innocent. I'm not like the others, the alluring illusion of invisibility. The next day, they came through this very gate that I'm now entering. 6 of them, 6 fully armed Israeli soldiers without any sort of warrant. I was not immune. Of course not. The invasion was a real awakening, and they may well come again, and this time not only to enter and search, but to do more. They could destroy the house. For the last 50 years, they have been destroying thousands of Palestinian homes. By hoping against hope that I would be spared, I was choosing to forget that the policy is indiscriminate. I, as a Palestinian, am always subject at any time to the whims of any Israeli soldier. For 50 years, I've been possessed by that feeling of insecurity whenever I come back to my house. Will this precariousness ever come to an end? Nothing lasts forever, not this occupation or disturbed murmurings of my heart. The day will surely come when I'll be free of apprehensions. Yet for now, I needn't dwell in fear, for at long last, I have found what I was searching for, my home, and no one can take that away from me. Penny is still in her study. She has turned on the side lamp with a blue painted shade, and it lights up the colorful, life-affirming painting by Samia Halabi that we had carefully chosen when we first came to live in this house. I can smell the dish she is preparing for dinner. The table with the ceramic top in the courtyard is already set. I'll do my part for the meal, and we'll sit outside under the lemon tree and eat. I go to wash my hands before dinner and take a look at my face in the mirror. I find that I'm able to smile back at the image I see. I leave the bathroom and go out into the courtyard. On the stone wall are the mottled shadows of the branches of the lemon tree we planted in the middle that has now matured into full length and is laden with yellow lemons. I look around me at my intimate surroundings and now call out to Penny, I'm home. Thank you.
I think we've all moved by that last paragraph, Penny. We're happy that you're with Raja in Ramallah. And I know when I first read the book and I came to that passage or that sentence, Raja, I go to wash my hands before dinner and take a look at my face in the mirror. I find that I am able to smile back at the image I see. And I wonder and I hope that many of us will have this experience of having the harmony that Raja writes about, because I think this is part of our being in Palestine and being or coming to terms with the reality on the ground and of being part of this place that we love. You took us, as I read, going home. I went home too, and I felt many of your moments of anguish, many of the moments of love, many of the humor. I laughed a lot, remembered people that we both knew, experiences. But most of all, I think I was really grateful that you trusted us with something very intimate, Raja. Something that many people go through, especially us as Palestinians who are trying to find and cope with our lives and who have lived I speak for myself, living most of my life in Ramallah, and we see the changes in Ramallah, and we see some things that we consider almost immoral changes, and we don't know how to cope. But Raja, in and out, I think you managed to help us with your own questioning yourself and finding answers. You help us also to question and maybe to find answers. And maybe one of the reasons I'd like to ask you about is how did you decide to write this book? I mean, this was a very intimate, soul-searching book. It's not like something you write about that is away from you. This is very much part of your soul, of your growing up as a young man with your family, and not just Ramallah. So how did you decide to do this?
Well, partly the first inspiration was Ingmar Bergman's film. Can you hear? I think it's not working. Ingmar Bergman's film, I don't know how many of you saw it, called Wild Strawberries, which is a wonderful film. I would recommend it to anyone. It's a film about this professor, Igor, who is going to get an honorary degree. And on the way, he goes with his family, and they stop at a place where he was growing up. And he has experiences there. He remembers how his brother stole the woman he loved and so on. And then he goes and visits his mother, and we see the mother. And we understand a lot about him from his going back in time and dealing with these childhood things. And in a way, I wanted this book to go into homes that I lived in and meet with experiences that have lingered and sometimes I never resolved. So I go back in the course of this day's walk into the homes that I lived in and have experiences and encounters. And so that was the personal level. And then there is, of course, the political level, which is the personal is political.
Of course, always.
And so in the course of, for me, Ramallah is both what it was and what it is now. But I didn't want to be in a lamenting mood.
Yeah.
It's not a lamentation,
No.
because I can see some good things that have changed in Ramallah as well as the bad things. But also, for example, in the beginning, I passed by the Orthodox school, which is near my house. And there I remember that I saw on the wall about Nadim Nuwara, a 16-year-old who was shot in the prison Afra when he was going to demonstrate. And then I say to myself, this guy grew up and died without knowing what was there in Afra. Afra was a beautiful place near Betunia, and Kan Balua. It was a place where the water gathered in winter and became like a little pond. And we were both reminiscing that we used to go and sail little boats there.
Little paper boats.
Yeah.
We thought it was the sea.
We thought it was the sea. And then when the water dried, there was all this plantation of bali, non-irrigated vegetables, which were very delicious. So it was a beautiful place, so unlike the way it has become. And for the generation that is growing now, and for this Nadim Nuwara, for example, who has died even without knowing it at all he knows is the way, the ugly Offer prison and military court. And likewise, so many other parts of Ramallah. Most people do not know that there were places where there were springs in Ramallah, which have been totally blocked now with the... So I tried to evoke the old Ramallah and the new Ramallah, but without lamentation. And all this I do as I walk in the streets from one place to another, and meeting people and bringing memories of different people. There are many eccentrics in Ramallah, so I speak of some of them.
Oh, these were wonderfully evoked, and it helped me remember that Ramallah, although it was like a little village and not really exposed to many people from abroad, but we had our own very special people to look at and gossip about and remember, and now they're gone, and we miss some of this. There's magic in these people who are eccentric.
I want to mention one person who was Saat al-Almani.
Saat al-Almani, I think,
German
that's it.
clockmaker, who remains a mystery to this day. I asked many people, including Dr. Shawqi, about him, and because he could speak with him German, and he found that his German is weak. And so it has been a mysterious, nobody knows his name, nobody still knows his name. He died mysteriously when he was crossing the street and the motorcycle came. And there were no motorcycles then. Where did this motorcycle come from? Was he perhaps an escaped Nazi who was murdered by the Israelis, some revenge murder? Mystery, total mystery. And I have a clear memory of him, so I describe him and try to investigate his story, and he's one of many people I write about in Ramallah. His wife is not still alive, and he had no children, and everybody knew him as Abu Simon, although he didn't have a Simon, and there
was no Simon.
So anyway, we'll talk about him later.
So Raja really brought beautiful memories in his walk, and people and events, but also sad ones, as he said. And this is I think the fantastic way of how Raja writes, especially in this book. I think he really showed the brilliance of how you write about what you see, what you reflect about, without much. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of compassion, but there is a very selective way of describing a feeling. And I think it also helps one, as I noticed while reading, it helps even the reader, Raja, that associates with these memories and realities, to also think the way you do. And it helps us not lament, because most of us do lament the past. So how do you come, this is my next question, how do you come to navigate the tensions between what is really personal and the soul-searching things or important things in your life to the everyday, to the political, to the stark reality of things. Do you have a way of looking at things that you might give us an idea about?
The personal is political. That's my starting point.
Okay.
And from small incidents and feelings and so on, I try to build up something which is more common and universal. Because ultimately, it's about the small things, and I write about the small things, and I describe in detail the small things in order to create a picture and to build on it and make it into a more universal experience.
And maybe that's why you reach a foreign audience, Raja. It's not just that you're writing in English, but we keep going back. I don't know. I feel we're not including everyone. And so I feel while you are an Arab speaking, your mother tongue is Arabic, and you write in English, and you have a wide readership in English, international. You visit festivals. You are exposed, and you expose people through your writings to Palestine. Do you think this is meaningful for you? Do you think this is part of? Was this part of why you wrote these things, or did it come about?
I don't know if it comes as a surprise to anybody here, but the main reason I write is for myself, and that's the beginning.
Yeah.
And as evidence of this, I usually would discuss the idea that I have of a book with my publisher. In this case, I said, I'm going to write this, whether it's going to be publishable or not, because I want to write it, I need to write it. And I did without approaching the publisher at all until it was entirely finished. But I must say, along the way, after I worked a lot on it and got completely involved with it, I thought maybe I'm being crazy. Maybe it is a crazy idea to write about one-day walk. And then I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't spend more time before I get a little confirmation. So I told Penny, please read it. I usually don't let her read until I've finished. So I told her, please read it and tell me just one thing, am I crazy or not? She read it and said, you're not crazy, so I continued. But it started,
Thank you, Penny.
But it started as very crazy because I was going to write only about my wardrobe and my old clothes. And from each article of clothing, I was going to write about that time when I wore it, because I'm a hoarder and I keep all my old clothes and I cannot throw anything. And so I thought I will write about my clothing. And I did for a whole manuscript. And then possibly it's good I gave it up. And
no, you should publish it, Raja. Yalla, next book.
So I write for myself. And then eventually the book becomes a little more public. And then I think of the reader and work on that. And it becomes a public thing. And then it's out of my hands.
But what about the exposing also through your other books, Palestine, your political thoughts, your way you look at things? Do you think that you have reached people that otherwise might not have been touched?
Well, I wrote a lot on the legal aspects. And I thought that the books on the legal aspects were very important and were making a big difference. To my surprise, I found that very little difference because the readership is very small, of course. And then when I wrote Palestinian Walks, for example, I heard from many people who said, oh, now finally we understand about the land and the issues of the land. And it wasn't a legal book about the land, it was a book of walks on the land. And through the walks on the land, people understood and they said, finally we now understand. And so I think the approach of a book, the experience of a book is different than any other experience, because in the book you are with yourself. You're reading and you're with yourself, and the book helps you imagine things, and it becomes part of you because it becomes part of your imagination. And that is the most enduring thing, much more so than a statement or an impression or a speech, even if it is the strongest speech possible, it's not, or a film. A film you can usually forget more easily, but a book that becomes part of you because you've read it and you absorbed it and imagined it as you read it becomes very much part of you.
And I think you relate to it, to many of the things when you read. You relate to characters, to issues, to love, to hate, to, well, I think this is the way you get held by a book, is when it reflects what you are also thinking and what you're also imagining or want to imagine or what it evokes in you. Anyway, we go to another question, Raja. I tried to ask you this, and the reason is about language again. Your kind of writing, and because you are from Palestine, and because you are a modern writer, I consider you a modern style writer, I regret deep down in my heart that you do not write in Arabic. And because one of the reasons is that I feel that young people or generations of people who only read Arabic, don't know English very well to read your books, would really benefit from your books and from your way of looking at things, because we are in need of new ways of thinking, especially in literature. There are many excellent writers in Arabic literature, but I feel also that one who writes the combination or the type of subjects that Raja writes about is very, very important for our young people to read about. And I think they miss when they don't read Raja's books. So when I asked Raja how does he feel about this, of course not everybody can write in Arabic. There is always something, a problem. And he explained to me something that I thought was very interesting, why he doesn't write in Arabic.
Well, it has never been an issue for me whether to write in Arabic or English, because immediately when I started writing in English. I write for my office work in Arabic as well, but for literary writing, I've never written except in English. And I feel that if I could have written the Arabic that I speak, I would be very happy. But then you can't write as you speak. You always are translating when you write in Arabic, because then you have to write in the classical. And so if I'm translating anyway, I might as well write in English, which is a language I'm comfortable with and which I like as a language. It agrees with my way of thinking. I like the understatement. I like the structure of the language. There's nothing wrong in Arabic, and perhaps if I were a better literary person, I would be able to achieve the same thing in Arabic, but I'm not, so I don't do it. And I think books can be translated.
Yeah.
Although in translation something is lost, because my language and my way of writing sometimes feels very strange in Arabic. Staccato, more staccato than
well, a good translator will get it, I think,
Raja. A good translator will get it, yes. I've had some
so if anyone knows a good translator, I really feel some of Raja's books need to be translated into Arabic. Some have, yeah, but to be more available for people young people to be exposed to his writings, I think that will be a good thing. At least I will feel happy, Raja. So I was wondering about the last thing I was always wondering. When someone writes like you, and you've been writing in the same genre for many years, do you ever consider writing a fiction or short stories or something that's different? You write poetry, I know, sometimes.
No,
well, not really.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Well, I don't think there is a big difference between writing the way I do it and novel writing, because in writing this, for example, let's take this last book, I had also to do the same considerations as a novelist would do, which is to make the choices, to make the flow, to decide how to move from one episode to another. And these are the experiences of a novelist as well. It is a representation. Even though you are writing about factual things, between the facts as they are lived and as they are represented in the writing is a big gap. And the same gap exists in whether it's the basis is a fictitious thing or a non-fiction thing, whether it's facts or fiction. It's the same process of the writing. And in fact, in France, they don't make that distinction very strongly. And the books that I had published in France were called novels. And so I don't really think that there is anything greater merit in writing novels. I feel I have a lot to write about still before I start inventing things. And when I run out of ideas about what to write, I think I will perhaps start inventing. But it hasn't happened yet.
Well, we'll look forward to that because I think you will be a great novelist. Fiction, I mean. So, Raja, thank you so much for this presentation. And before I say thanks for taking us along your book, for all of you who are going to read the book, go to Ramallah once again, and maybe newly back in your thoughts, back in your memories. I want to thank Raja for one thing that really, Raja the gardener, for bringing attention to the capers, to this beautiful wild plant that is all around us. It grows in the nooks and crannies of old buildings. It's beautiful, it's elegant, it's tender, and he describes it so beautifully. And I think we might eventually call it the flower of Palestine, a wild flower of Palestine. So thank you, Raja. And if you have any questions, I don't know how long will it be. That would be nice.
I want to ask 3 questions if we have time. But the first one. I know that you like to psychoanalyze yourself. And you mentioned wild strawberries. In the last scene in the movie, we see Isaac smiling, and we can say happy because at last he has reconciled with his own history and life. My question to you is, have you, because I know that the main issue with psychoanalyzing yourself is you never finished. You always feel that you need to go and reinterpret again and again and again. So after writing all these books, do you feel that you have reached the last version of your own life? That is the first question.
Let's first start with that, and then if there's time, you can ask other questions. Okay. I like your question. I think it's a very good question, and I certainly, in the course of writing this book, made great progress in working on myself. And the book is also, I didn't mention this, but it's also about aging, and aging is a very difficult thing, and it struck me all of a sudden, really. Goethe has said something like that, age comes at you suddenly, and I think that's true. And in the course of writing this book, when I was thinking more about aging, it struck even deeper and made it much more difficult for me to deal with all these subjects that I was dealing with, including aging, all at once. And so I think at the end of the book, I felt a certain relief and peace. But then you keep thinking that you will come to the end, and that is it. But I think it only comes to a plateau, and then you are able to deal with other things, and life goes on. And I think we are such complicated beings that if you look into yourself, the more you look into yourself, the more you find things that you need to deal with and struggle with. And I think it has been a certain comfort at the end of the book that I arrived at, but I can't say it's the final chapter.
Thank you. My second question is, how can we understand your sense of not belonging? I mean, is it the classical case of a child of books in a masculine culture, when you were a teenager, reading books while others playing in the street, so you feel you are not belonging, or because your father failed to show enough validation? Or is it because simply you live in a city like Ramallah that lacks intellectual stimulation? Why you really, let's say, how do you psychoanalyze this feeling of not belonging after writing more than one book about Ramallah? And I think still you feel that you, I know the quote of Najib Mahfoud that, maybe you belong to Ramallah because you don't belong to it. You fail to get out of it. But what can you tell us about your solitude?
Well, in one sense, I of course belong to Ramallah, very much so, and I feel very much a man of Ramallah. But in another sense, I think a writer always feels as an outsider. Personally also, traditionally, I grew up as a weak person, physically weak. And so I stayed away from other people, and at school I was unable to join in the sports and so on. And all of this made me more of an outsider. And then also as a writer, you have to deal with issues that you cannot always be with people to deal with them. You have to give time for yourself. And that brings me away from people as well. But I think it's also my nature. I'm a loner.
The last question, I'm sorry. I said 3 questions. When you were walking in Irsal Street and you were uncomfortable seeing a Safina and the new Muqata'a, because the remains of the old Muqata'a is not there, you seem to insinuate an argument that that's an illusion, Ramallah is a set of illusion, but it seems to me that the same argument that you are using was used against you and your father when you insist working as lawyers under incubation. They used to tell you, you give the illusion that there is a justice under incubation. It's everything or nothing battle. And I think you and your father justly and correctly fought against this argument. That it's not true. Why can't we say that it's the same? That having a Safina building does not give us an illusion, because we know that the incubation is there. And we can have a nice dinner in a Safina building, and then go to Beit El and throw some stones. Why is it different, having Safina building and working as a lawyer under incubation?
Well, I think you're mixing things that cannot be mixed, really. But I think for the Muqata'a itself, my feeling was that by destroying the Muqata'a entirely, and not leaving any remnants of the old prison and of the military court and all these things that have so much meaning for people, where people have endured so much, and not even leaving a plaque describing them. Those who destroyed it so entirely and built instead the museum on it have meant that the people who had experiences there are not recognized. And likewise, many other parts of Ramallah where things happened which are not even mentioned at all. Like this wall of blood near the center of the town, which was a very sad place. And it could have been commemorated. There could have been more commemoration. Instead, the commemoration is only one-sided, the military struggle. Well, the military struggle, okay, fine. But there was more to it than the military struggle. There was the resistance, which is passive resistance, which is the sumud. And the sumud should be recognized more. And the places of struggle of people should be recognized, and they are not. So that is it. Now, as to the Safina as a symbol, it's not that I didn't like it. I used it as a metaphor.
I know.
Yeah, so...